really need your support. So please, if you can, give us a little bit of something. Swipe your card and it's $5 and you'll never miss it. So thank you for considering us. Twain was influenced by black figures in his life. His early experiences in Missouri indelibly shaped his views on race and justice. Olivia Langdon, his wife, also shaped his views immensely, as you know. Twain greatly admired Frederick Douglass, the esteemed orator and abolitionist, and many of you who know about Twain's story will remember that Uncle Daniel also played a big part in his life. Importantly, Twain was greatly influenced by George Griffin. George Griffin, his butler, who was a trusted and respected member of the household. Griffin's presence and interactions with Twain likely provided the author with insights into the lives and struggles of Black Americans, which he subtly wove into his works, including the character of Jim in Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. In James, Mr. Everett channels and enriches this historical context with the authenticity and depth of Jim's voice. By doing so, Mr. Everett amplifies the voices that Twain could only partially echo. This new novel doesn't reframe an old tale, it brings new life into it, offering readers a deeper understanding of Jim's experiences, thoughts, and emotions. This novel is an entirely new narrative, giving him the agency and attention that he deserves. This book is a conversation with Twain. A little bit about Mr. Everett. He is a distinguished professor of English at the University of Southern California. His most recent books include Dr. No, finalist for the NBCC Award for Fiction, and winner of the Penn Stein Book Award. The Trees, finalist for the Booker Prize and the Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction. Telephone, finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. So Much Blue, Erasure, and I Am Not Sidney Poitier. He has received the NBCC Ivan Sandrof Life Achievement Award and William Campbell Prize from Yale University. This is just to mention a few. American Fiction, the feature film based on his novel Erasure, was released last year and was awarded the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. We're joined this evening and very honored to have Michael Harriot. Mr. Harriot is a journalist, author, and cultural critic known for his acerbic wit and biting commentary. He is the author of Black AF History. His award-winning journalism has appeared in the Washington Post, The Atlantic, Your TV, and his mom's refrigerator. Mr. Harriot has earned degrees in mass communications and history from Auburn University and earned a master's degree in macroeconomics and international business from Florida State University, so the climate in here will fit him perfectly. He has earned National Association of Black Journalists Awards for digital commentary, television news writing, and magazine writing. His How Did We Get Here segment on The Amber Ruffin Show earned a 2021 Emmy nomination for Outstanding Writing for a Variety Series. I am so honored and humbled to welcome to the stage Michael Harriot and Percival Everett. Welcome to the Mark Twain House.
How's everybody doing out there? I didn't see an on button. Thankfully this is working. So a couple things. First of all, this is going to be a conversation. I know everybody says this is going to be a conversation, but it's really not going to be an interview. We're just going to talk about stuff, and hopefully you'll like it, mostly about the book, James. But I want to start by asking, because we're here, and I think this is an important question, an important reason to start. What was your relationship with Twain? Or is there one? How do you regard him? You're not just a writer, you're a professor. So talk about how you see and what your relationship is with Twain.
Well, he's dead,
Yeah.
I have four influences on my sense of humor and my sense of irony, and they are in order: my father, Mark Twain, Groucho Marx, and Bullwinkle the Moose. And I read Life in the Mississippi and Roughing It when I was really quite young, and I liked it. It made me laugh. I was impressed by it, and I wouldn't have articulated it in this way then because I wouldn't have been able to. But Twain's appreciation of people, anything funny came out of not jokes, though he was fond of jokes. It came out of human interaction, his observations about people, and that was instructive for me. And so he was important in that way. I did read an abridged version of Huck Finn when I was maybe 9. I don't know what made it abridged. It said abridged on the cover, and I didn't know what that meant.
First of all, can I guess, was it a Reader's Digest condensed version? I used to love those things, man.
I don't know if it was. That's a good question. But it was just an adventure, and it didn't do for me what the nonfiction had done for me. And of course, then I read Pudd'nhead Wilson, which was great. But when I was a teenager, I reread the unabridged Huck Finn, and you can imagine as a black teenager reading this text, it was problematic. Yet I could see the importance of it. The first time a character, this Huck Finn representing adolescent America, wandering through his landscape and dealing with and confronting that aspect of American experience that would become so defining, that was defining from the inception until now, which is race.
Yeah. And so what's interesting about that is, and I never thought about this until literally 3-4 minutes ago, when he said, in the introduction, that Jim was a minor character. So I played Jim when I was 12 years old in a theater production of Huckleberry Finn. And I'm like, it's interesting to me as a black person who also was very influenced, and a writer who's influenced by Twain, that people think of Jim as a minor character. It kind of revolved around him in my head, maybe because I played him, but that was just an interesting thought. So when you decided to write this book, first of all, was it an idea that you toyed with, or because sometimes I think people think that writers sit and contemplate an idea for a book for years before they start on it, or sometimes it's right before they walk into a pitch meeting with a publishing company, we're like, all right, what about a book about Huckleberry Finn from the black perspective? So was this an idea that you toyed with? Because to me, it's a monumental task.
Well, the good and romantic answer would be yes, but I'm afraid it's not. 3 years ago, I was playing tennis, and I hit a ball out of the court, and while I watched it sail an embarrassingly long way, I thought to myself, has anyone ever told the story of Huck Finn from Jim's point of view? And which also explained to me why I'd hit the ball so poorly. And then I went home and started looking around trying to find out find any example of someone writing that story. There were some work of continuations of the character Jim and other things, but no retelling of that story. And so I embarked on the novel. And when, addressing what you were saying about Jim being a minor character, in a way he's the crux of the novel because he's the source of Huck's moral problem of do I turn in this man because he's property, or is this wrong that he is property? And but Jim is so thinly described. His answers are the answers that America, his voice is the one that America imagined the slave voice to be, without depth, without any kind of second order thinking about anything, superstitious, easily duped by even the most simple-minded child. And so therein lies the problem of Jim being a real character in Twain's novel, is that he's not given a chance to be that, even though he's the only positive role model, male role model that Huck has.
The interesting thing about that to me is, yes, and everything we consume is kind of like that. Like, if you grew up in the 70s and watched Good Times, that then white people's versions of black people. And if you grew up in the 80s, and if you grew up in the, so I think he can be both a central character in the book in my head, because he was black, and that's how all the black all the depictions of blackness was, and a veneer without depth, right? But when and we're going to get back to that, but so when you thought of that, right? Like, so there's having that idea and being, and I don't even want to use the word brave, but being, I guess, having the audacity to do it. Because when you think about this, right, I've wondered about this. Is there a part of the American canon more ubiquitous than Huckleberry Finn, right? Like, okay, the Bible isn't in the American canon. That was, so, like, what has, maybe there's movies like Star Wars and stuff like that, but in literature, is there a more ubiquitous, more, like, everybody has read Huckleberry Finn, whether you read it for pleasure as a teenager or in your 10th grade literature class? I'm trying to think of something that would be more ubiquitous than that. Maybe the Constitution, but that's nonfiction, but kind of fiction. But once you had the idea, the step to saying, I'm going to do it, and to telling someone else that you were going to do it and say, hey, you should pay me to do this. Talk about that process.
Well, I'm not known for exercising good judgment. And no, I never had, there was never any pause. It just seemed like something that I had to do. I relate everything to horses. And when I lived on the Arapaho Shoshone Reservation for a while, and there was a horse at Arapaho Ranch named Gus, the only mean horse I've ever met in my life. Gus would run across a pasture to bite someone, and I saw Gus, and I said, well, does anyone ever ride Gus? They said, oh no one rides Gus. And I said, I was 33. I said, I'll ride Gus. And it took 4 men to saddle Gus, which should have been assigned to me. And I got on Gus, and it was a terrible experience, I have to tell you. But that's kind of how writers come to works. Sure, I'll get on. there's not a second thought about it.
Yeah, because I think I am the person who says, oh, nobody's been on the horse on the Arapaho reservation, then it's obvious that this horse isn't meant to be ridden. Right? Like, it's obvious that this book isn't meant to be written if nobody's ever had this idea. So I want to go back to, the conversation about Jim, because, fleshing out a character who was, as you mentioned, so thin and so shallow. Was it research or was it just your imagination to imagine Jim as a fully whole human being and what he was like?
Well, I had to create the character, of course, but there was no research I could do for that. I just had to dream him up. But in the back of my mind, of course, was the fact that the depiction of enslaved people was always, and throughout the U.S. history and in all entertainment, that shallow slaves ate, drank, and had babies. That was it. They didn't have deep thoughts, which is, of course, crazy. They're people. Their thinking was just like the people who were enslaving them, and perhaps because of being enslaved, deeper. And so I had to address that. And the basis of all of that, of course, is language.
Which gets me to me, one of the most brilliant parts of the book is his language and how, and I hate when people say, this was a metaphor for this, or, you use this as a subtext for this. But when you made the choice to have Jim speak in front of white people and appease their sensibilities into what their version of a black man is versus how we see each other, that choice was not just intentional, right? It had to mean something, right?
Well, it was true.
Right.
When the enslaved people talk to each other in the novel, they speak in what we would call, for lack of a better term, standard English. Who knows whether it was actually standard English, and it was probably different, had different sounds in different places. Regardless, people who are enslaved, people who are imprisoned or oppressed, find ways to talk to each other that don't allow entry to their enemies. That's just a really human thing. There's a film, 12 Years a Slave, that directed by the British director Steve McQueen, and it has a part of the story that I just don't like because it's wrong, and that is, and I'll give you the setup if you don't know the film. First of all, it's sort of a fantastical setup. You have this free black man living in Vermont very happily with his white neighbors. They sit around eating biscuits and drinking tea. And so already it's science fiction. But he's kidnapped and he's taken to Louisiana and plopped into a plantation, or maybe Georgia, maybe your house. And then they plop him down there, and he understands what all the slaves are saying to each other. He has not grown up there. He has not been enculturated there. He would not know what they are saying to each other. He would have no way of knowing. And so that film has cheated these characters out of a real important feature of their humanity, and that is that they would have command and deep command over their ability to communicate with each other.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important so we have to acknowledge that, like, so white people don't know that there is a way that we communicate. Well, I won't say don't know that. Many white people aren't aware that there is, like, most white people have never seen black people communicate with each other, still to this day, right? And so, to me, the brilliant part of that novel was not just exposing that, but doing it in a way that, like, revealed that what Jim was inherently to the people he spoke the slave language was less than human. And he had to feed that perception to survive. And that's one of the things about the book, is that the way you approached the inhumanity of race-based human servitude was not from the perspective of, it's a brutal institution, but that there was something wrong with the white people who were doing it, which I think, again, because they have never seen us communicate with each other. It's a common idea, right? But what were the ways that you wanted to, not humanize Jim, but if you're writing this from a black perspective, what were the things that you wanted to do with the character Jim that showed, like, that turned Twain's idea on its edge?
Well, I wanted to depict the enslaved people as fully human, for one thing, just able to talk about things with depth and curiosity, things that weren't attributed in our literature, both visual and written. And you're right that it was a matter of survival, but it's also just something that's so natural to us, even within our own families, black or white, Chinese, Hispanic. We have ways of talking to each other that are our own, that other people might not understand. If you make the situation more dire, the language becomes more private. And this is stuff, and it's not new with me. I didn't decide that this Du Bois, in talking about double consciousness, is dealing with this. Frantz Fanon is talking about this when he's talking about the mask that black people and all around the world have to wear to survive. It's a common concept that gets overlooked. And it's made so much worse by the fact that from habit of watching and reading certain depictions of people, we come away seeing people in that way. I was last year, maybe 6 or 7 months ago, I stay up late and I was working, and an Abbott and Costello movie came on. It was called Screams from Africa or something like that. And in it, there are all of these black people, black Africans, depicted as wide-eyed, superstitious, childlike characters. I knew that movie existed. I didn't have a problem with that movie existing, except that it shouldn't. But someone decided to air that. That was a decision made, and I don't think it was somebody sitting in a production room someplace going, what do I do with this cassette? Well, put it in, Dave, and that's how it ended up on the air. Somebody saw it and made that decision. In 2023. That's bizarre. Without any cognizance of the fact that that kind of and if you think about it too long, what if my kid gets up in the middle of the night and he's 4 and he goes in and he turns on the television while I'm sleeping and sees this. Well, that's what we grew up with. But it wasn't in the middle of the night, it was in the middle of the day. And it didn't stop when we became adults. So you just mentioned the television show Good Times, where we have, the term is cooning. In fact, one of the actors, two of the actors, one of them was, I can't remember the man's name. He plays the father on the show.
John Amos, that's the role.
Hated working on the show for this very reason. And I think he left. They killed him off, as they say on television. But he left, quit the show, because he couldn't take it. But the show stayed on with the same kind of behavior that is truly extraordinarily offensive.
Yeah, and so I was on it sounds kind of bad now. I was on a panel with the creator of Good Times, and I had to specify that, because he is considered a trailblazer.
Are you talking about Norman?
Yeah, Norman.
Oh, I have a Norman story for you.
He's considered a trailblazer. Well, yeah. So, we know Monty Griffin created it, but he's considered a trailblazer in the same way that Twain is considered like a trailblazer. But it's important, I always point out that it's important to know that what he was trailblazing is a white person's depiction of what they imagine black people to be, right? But one of the ways that one of the running themes among many in the book was how James thought about freedom, right? Like the idea that someone who has always been free can contemplate the existential meaning of freedom is absurd on its face. And so we see Jim contemplating it and even critiquing Voltaire and the people that we hold as scholars. And then one of the most interesting parts to me is that he, repeatedly says that there is no, I don't believe in that free state BS, right? In a country that allows slavery, how can there be, the concept of freedom? And, that's something that wasn't really from Twain's book. It wasn't something that you turned upside down, but you included in your book. What were some of the ways that you wanted to say, I don't just want to give a perspective from the black perspective of what Twain did, but I want to, expand the notion or the things that Huckleberry Finn talked about?
Well, in fairness to Twain, he was writing a novel about an adolescent white boy.
Yeah.
And that's his main character, and he's in the head of that character. And aside from any conversations that he might have with the character Jim, there's no place to explore those issues, especially not as Jim is depicted. So I ended up writing a novel that Twain was not equipped to write. His experience wouldn't have allowed entry into Jim and his perception of the world and what it felt like to be enslaved, only what it would feel like to see someone enslaved. And the difference, of course, is that he's dealing with a young boy, but Jim, my character James, is an adult man with a family, with concerns that young Huck has never experienced. Aside from the race and the slavery, he is a boy, which leads to that symbiotic relationship that exists between the two. Jim, or my character James, is always taking care of Huck as a decent adult would. Conversely, Huck without knowing or realizing or being capable of realizing it is essential for Jim's safe movement through the world outside of the place where he is owned. Without Huck as an excuse to anyone passing by, Jim is an escaped slave and so in great danger. So they're really important to each other.
So, to the audience, how we got here is, like, there are people who I know that are huge Twain fans, and they know that I'm a huge Twain fan. And we were talking one day, and one of them was a member of the Twain Museum and said, you know, it would be cool. And I was like, yeah, right, that'll never happen. And here we are. But in that same group of people, when they were reading this novel, a lot of them texted me like halfway through and would say like, hey, can y'all sleep? Like, it was the depiction of such an inhuman world, right? Like, not for Jim, right? But the world was inhuman, the entire world. And, like, not for Jim to navigate, but that's just what America was. Like, there were people who had nightmares about that. While Huckleberry Finn was a book kind of whimsical, right? Like, it was fun. There were deeper themes, but it was, you know, a Twain book. It was funny and fun and adventurous. And did you ever have any plan or any notion of, like, maybe I should be as whimsical in my approach as Twain was in his approach? Or could you write the story of Jim in that manner?
Well, in order to do that, I'd have to make Jim the character that he was in Huck Finn, which is simple-minded and superstitious. And I just don't believe that he or any other enslaved person was like that. It's not a corrective. It's just that not only was Twain ill-equipped to occupy that cultural and psychic space of Jim, but he's removed from us the novel is removed from us by 140 years. You can't expect that of the work. The fact of the matter is here we are, and things aren't so different because evolution is really some slow shit. But Jim, I don't begrudge Twain any telling us. Huck Finn is a failed novel. I love Twain. I love a lot of his work. Pudd'nhead Wilson might be a perfect novel, but Huck Finn, he stopped for several years in the middle of it and then came back to it. And it may well be that he lost his stride, but it's more likely that exercising a mercenary impulse, as we know Twain was famously in need of money, reintroduces Tom Sawyer in the last third of the novel. And it becomes a very strange novel that abandons the real moral complexity and becomes a mere adventure where, ironically, and I do have a reading on this that will allow us to continue to teach it, but it becomes that adventure that loses the thread. I've been trying to find a way to have the ending make sense to me, and one day someone suggested this, and then I went back and I thought about it, and what I came up with is a little different, and that is Jim is a pawn in this game being played by Huck and Tom. They're making up this elaborate scheme to free him, but he's already been freed. That's the irony of it. He's already been his papers have already been signed. He's a free man, but Jim doesn't know it. Twain, I know was dismayed at the pain and the suffering caused by Reconstruction. And in a way, the treatment of Jim in the novel is not so different from the way black people were treated during Reconstruction, where they were pawns between so-called carpetbaggers and Southerners trying to regain power. So, and I realize that's a very generous reading, and I certainly don't think that Twain thought about that consciously, but I'm a firm believer in the fact that I, as a writer, I do not matter. The book, the text, does what it's going to do, and what that text does is it can be read as an allegory for the treatment of blacks during Reconstruction. So the book can be redeemed in that way, but it is a reach.
Does it get so? I think the complexity of having these conversations is that, like, ultimately we have to think about just what you said, redemption, when, like, sometimes there's no, that was the world, right? Like, Mark Twain was not a time traveler, right? Like, that was the world, that was what the world thinks. It's not, you can judge it personally, bad or good, but that is what the world was. And one of the things that your novel does is, one, it doesn't seem to time travel either, right? Like, a lot of times we want to be redemptive and say, use 2024 thinking to view, 1862 or 1850 and what your book does is you view Jim from the perspective of, like, what black people were in 1850, right? Not judgment, but this is how we were. Were you tempted, because, first of all, how many people have finished it by show of hands? So, were you tempted into not making, was there an alternative ending other than what you had?
Well, there was the one where the spaceship lands, but I decided to not use that.
Did Parliament come out?
Yeah. No, and I have to apologize. I suffer from what we in my house call work amnesia. And when I'm done with the book, I really don't remember it. I certainly don't remember working on it. The book's on its own now. It's got to do whatever work it's going to do. I can't help it anymore. I was trying to be truthful, and to the character that I had imagined. And as things, Jim is a fairly peaceful man, for a couple of reasons. One is he is a kind person. Kind person who lives in a dangerous world, but as the danger becomes not more present for him, but becomes more real for those people around him, how the violence has taken people from him, how the knowledge of his being ripped from his family initially sinks in. Outrage is his response, which grows into something that's a little more profound, which is rage itself. If we in the United States, we're a 10-day outrage country. We get outraged for 10 days, and then we do something else. Oh, it's the Super Bowl, okay. But something else. But rage is a different thing, and that's where finally James is pushed.
And I know this question could be asked of any novel, that has a central character. But was the book about James, or was the book about all of the people, the world, the white world around James? Because there was a critical examination of, for instance, what whiteness is, what freedom is, what America is, or was it more a look at that central character?
All right. Every one of our stories embodies all of those stories. James, for the purposes of teaching a literature class, is the main character, whatever that means. He is the vehicle of the story. We can't understand the story without him, nor can we understand James without understanding the world through which he moves. That's why I don't shy away from using the word nigger in the novel. It's an important word to know it was used by the people in that world, just as it's important to know who uses it now. If I go into a town and I find out that somebody will use that word, I'm a little more comfortable than if I think they're using it and I don't know it and I don't hear it. When I come to a field full of landmines, do you know what I like to see? A sign that says landmines. That gives me some comfort. Yeah. I know that there is danger there. That's why that word is important, because of the kinds of people who use it. We live it's very strange now in our world. For a very brief time, even racists in America knew that it was wrong to be a racist. But somewhere along the line, and you know where, racists got their swag back. And now there's no shame in it. And and I don't know how you take that step again.
Yeah. So, I don't know if there was ever a shame in it. It was just expedient not to appear.
That might well be the case.
So, there is also a throughout in the novel about literacy and the desire to be educated, which is like, every enslaved person and unenslaved person you met in that book was like, that was their longing, whereas like people like Huck was like, I don't want to be reading no books, right? Was that, and we know the historical origins of that, but were you intentionally trying to juxtapose that idea?
Well, sure. Huck is a kid. Why would he have to read? He's white. This is his world. It's his world. He's safe in it. The enslaved people, language for them is important. They are forced to be bilingual. They are forced to speak in a certain way to protect themselves. And they understand that literacy, knowledge, is the only way that they can be free. Even if for Jim, it's not even someone saying you're free. It's not being on free land. The fact that he can read, he's not free because he can't. He is not free really because he can't openly express in the world his illiteracy and fluency. But he is free in a way because he has exercised his mind. He has learned to read, and he wants to write, as he says. He doesn't want a story that's self-related. He wants to make a story that's self-written. And when he starts writing, long before he makes it to, in quotes, freedom, he is free. And that's why he earns the respect of the man who gives him the pencil.
And the depiction of race-based slavery in it, you know, whether it is, you know, Jim's own servitude or the enslaved people he encountered, the freed people he encountered, you know, you kind of see kind of the diaspora of the black human condition in those characters. But in characters that weren't in Twain's original version, was it harder, you know, considering your other works, was it harder kind of having something that existed and having to fit your work inside something that existed versus, like, I could just dream up a story from beginning to end and tell it, as you have done in other novels?
Well, I don't know if it was harder, it was different. I wanted to inhabit the world that Twain creates in that novel, but I didn't want to have any allegiance or loyalty to the text. And so I had to divorce myself from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I did this by reading the novel 15 times. I would get to the end and I would go right back to the beginning. Around time 4, I was fairly sick of it. And now I'm satisfied that I will never read the novel again. But it allowed me to know the world intimately, but the text became a blur. And so when I started working on my novel, I never looked back at Twain's novel for any kind of reference. Anything that shows up was what was in my head. And that gave me permission and comfort to write it.
Yeah. And well, first of all, that's brilliant, right? Like, to kind of embed the world in your head so that you won't have to make it.
Also masochistic, but still.
Yeah. Well, brutal. I would never do that. That's crazy. But then again, you rode a horse on a wrap up. But so I'm not going to spoil the novel for those who haven't finished it. So I'm just going to refer to the revelation in the novel as the thing. Was the thing there when you began working? Like, was that something that you created and knew that you were going to get to? Did it exist in your head when you began the novel?
What thing are you talking about?
The spaceship.
Yes, it was there. What wasn't there was the choice to be made between saving the character Norman and Huck. That just happened as a way to get to the thing.
Yeah. And so, do you think, because see, now what it made me want to do is go back and read Huckleberry Finn and see, like, was this thing always there, right? Was it a totally new thing that you created, or was it something like a genesis of an idea that you found and, like, this could exist?
Well, you know, we're people, we can find whatever we want in any story. I would say that it's hard to find it in Twain's novel. Though there's so much Huck's dialect, and the dialect of the white people are so, and the people here at the museum could tell you more than I can about this. We're so rooted in black dialect, or what Twain understood to be a black dialect, that in a way all the characters are black. So there's that. In fact, to that point, there was I can't remember the scholar's name back in the 90s or 80s. Leslie Fiedler, was Huck black? Oh, yeah, that's the sort of the homoerotic reading of it. But this, I think her name is Shelley Fisher King. Yeah, Shelley Fisher's book, where she talks about language and the idea that all of the languages is from Twain's understanding of Black English.
Yeah, so there's a long chapter in my book that goes into that about from the Gullah Geechee language, which was, aside from Native American language, is the first indigenous language of this country, right? Before English, because what we speak now is not what they spoke then. But it's like one of those things, because I did go back and read it, and it's like read Huckleberry Finn, and it's like one of those things where, as the kids say, when you see it, you can't unsee it, and now you see it everywhere, because like it's like, wait, did this nigga talk to Twain, and was he foreshadowing? So were you even concerned? You don't seem like you got on, again, you get on the horse. So were you even concerned about the Twain purists calling you a heretic, or?
No, I love blowback. I love it when people get upset, and people don't get upset enough, and it's really disappointing. No, I didn't think. Also, I didn't think that anyone would be upset by it, but I sure hope they would.
Yeah, and again, to me, one of the things about this, like, again, the audacity that it takes to write something so embedded in the American canon. When you think of, when you began this journey on writing the book, like, what did you hope? I mean, aside from having a finished novel, where did you hope it would end? Like, was it like something like, yeah, man, I did the sequel to Twain, or was it just, were you trying to say something using the tools that Mark Twain gave us? Like, it's like building a house with prehistoric tools. Where did you hope that, like, what was your ultimate goal in writing this book?
You think I'm a lot smarter than I am, apparently. I make novels. That's all I do. I don't make the meaning. The meaning gets made when readers read it. I can't control any of it. In fact, I have this expression. I'm of the Mama Bear School of Art. When I'm finished with a book, I throw it out into the world, and if it can eat and survive, great. But it cannot come back to the den. I'm done with it. What it means, I can't control. First of all, and about whether I have any message, I'm writing fiction, trying to make a living, which is ample evidence that I'm mentally deficient. You don't need to be listening to me about anything in the world. I have no message for anyone. I make art, and we consume art so that we can learn something about ourselves. Sadly, in our culture, we've forgotten how to view and come to art as a way of making ourselves, well, for lack of a better word, better. Walt Whitman in Blue Ontario Shore says, and I paraphrase, which is fine because it's Walt Whitman, is, if you want a better society, produce better people. And maybe as an artist, I get to participate in that simply by putting art into the world, but I'm not doing it by telling anybody what to think.
Yeah, I like that, but I reject that whole notion because there's no way you got a slave at 1837 reading Voltaire and contemplating the meaning of life and freedom and thinking I'm not smart. I want, and I mean, especially inside of an already existing piece of American canon, maybe the central piece of American canon. So regardless of whether you think you're smart or not, I'm going to say it for all of us. We think this is a brilliant book. We think that you have expanded the American canon. You have done a great service for all of us and Twain and American literature. And so we thank you for this book.
Thank you.
You know something, after that, I really don't have much to say. What an amazing evening. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to Mr. Harriot and to Mr. Everett for what I think are some life-changing words that were this conversation invoked tonight. Many of you purchased books. Many of you would like to purchase books. If you are picking up your signed copy of James, you go through this door here. If you want to purchase, you go through that door there. The rest of you can go right out that way. I want to thank the staff, the Mark Twain House Museum, and also the Board of Trustees for all their incredible work. Please, if you have a little extra, make a donation tonight. Thank you so much. God bless you all.